Welcome to Doing Business with a Servant's Heart podcast, doing business and life with a purpose. And that purpose is to be serving others, which results to achieving success. I'm your host, Steve Ramona. We created this show for you because we want everyone to be motivated, inspired, and educated to learn how to do business and live life to make an impact in the world. That's why you do your business. It's why you live your life, or hopefully you do. I want you to think about, as you listen to my incredible guest today, how you will serve today and what will that impact you create today. And I'm excited to have my guest on today. He's an author of Sales Management That Works, How to Sell in a World That Never Stops Changing. He teaches at Harvard Business School, which once I hear Harvard, it's awesome because we know how big a school that is. And he's just out there, really out there to help people and serve people in sales. Frank, welcome to the show, actually.
Steve, thank you. My pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you. And right, I want to stop in how to sell in a world that never stops changing. Let's talk about that.
Well, I mean, look, change is perennial in business. You know, if you read most business books, they somehow, for some reason, adopt a point of view as though the world were static up until 5 years ago, and then suddenly, it changed. That's not true. Change is perennial in business, but it's especially true now. There is research that supports the instinct many people have that the pace of change is accelerating, especially when it comes to business development. Selling cycles get longer, while product life cycles get shorter. The window of opportunity is less. That's what I mean by a world that never stops changing.
I like that because I use the Jeff Bezos model. If people have seen the picture way back when he's sitting at his desk, he's got the archaic sign, Amazon books, and where he is today, that's what you're saying. How many changes did Amazon go through?
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And by the way, people, if you want to understand the reality of what you and I are both saying, e-commerce, which people think is such a revolution, has been around for over 30 years. And in fact, books.com was selling books online nationally while Bezos was still working for a hedge fund in New York. So, things changed even when he was a young man. And then, of course, he contributed to changes big time.
Yeah. How big is sales for a business? So let's talk about small business and SMB, small business, small marketing businesses. What's their big key of sales?
Well, I mean, look, if you think you can start and run a business without sales, good luck, because sooner or later you're running a not-for-profit, no matter what you call it. It is vital. Customer acquisition and retention, profitable customer acquisition and retention is a core activity in business, any business. It's especially important if we're talking about small businesses. You and I have talked about this, but in my experience, and look, I don't know if our guests can see me, but once upon a time I looked like Jimi Hendrix. Now look at me. I've got a fair amount of experience here. But with most small businesses, most of their founders and owners are classic entrepreneurs. They made it the hard way, the right way. They began by selling themselves. The constraint on their growth or their ability to scale, as we now say, is often their inability to move from what they can do individually, personally, to getting things done through others. That, at least, is what I mean by servant leadership. I don't mean it in a religious sense. I mean the ability to get things done through others, making it easier for them. That's the heart of sales management and business development. And if a small business is going to grow beyond the reach of its founder, that's what they've got to be able to do. So it's pretty darn important.
So building those relationships sounds like it's super important as well.
Internally and externally. I think that is the right word. Relationships. It is about people, even in the age of AI, even with e-commerce. I always quote a wonderful old article by Peter Drucker. I don't know if you remember Peter Drucker, the management guru. Well, I'm glad you're nodding because I mentioned Peter Drucker to my MBA students last semester, and it was like I said, do you remember Julius Caesar? You know, but Drucker wrote a fabulous
Yeah.
book, a fabulous article, I'm sorry, back in the 1960s, which is a long time ago. And it was about the effect of what we today call information systems, what then they called automation. And the title of the article was The Manager and the Moron. The moron was the computer. The manager is the person who has to get things done. And Drucker's point was that a computer ultimately, and I see no reason where AI, by the way, has changed this, a computer ultimately is only as good as the data and questions that it's fed, garbage in, garbage out, as we say. And Drucker's point is that's its strength, precisely because it is a moron. It forces the manager to make sure that he or she knows what questions they're asking and what would qualify as a feasible answer. As information systems have obviously gotten orders and orders of magnitude better and more sophisticated since Drucker wrote that article 60 years ago, his basic insight not only remains true, it remains even more important. So, you know, that's how I think about the question you asked.
I like that. What Drucker wrote is really apropos today with social media. Garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's true with any kind of analysis. It's just a basic fact.
Yeah, it's not talked about much. I remember when I was in my computer days in the 80s, 70s and 80s, I heard that all the time, garbage in, garbage out. I think it came from a coder aspect and writing code and stuff. So, you know, Harvard Business School, you work with MBAs, they're in their 20s. What is one thing they come in that's a challenge for them when you teach them?
Well, I mean, it's changed over the years, Steve. My background, I was a professor at Harvard's Business School for about 10 years, made my way up the hierarchy, then left, ran a business, got lucky, I might add, in business. You know, I can spin this a different way for your audience when need be, but it was dumb luck. We sold at exactly the right time and then came back. In terms of any metric of IQ you want to look at, you know, their undergraduate scores, their GMAT scores, MBA students today are smarter than ever analytically. And the reason has nothing to do with Harvard or any of the other business schools. The reason has to do with the status of MBA programs in our society. We now get people in these programs who 20, 30 years ago would never have gotten an MBA, that have gone to med school, law school, you know, PhD in economics, etc. That's the good news. The other side of the coin, and Harvard here is different, we require work experience. On average, our students have 4 to 5 years of work experience before they are allowed into the MBA program. But if you look at what their experience has been, and I ask at the beginning of each class, the vast majority for 4 years or so before business school were essentially looking at spreadsheets. They were the spreadsheet jockeys at a private equity firm, a bank, data analytics in a SaaS firm, or whatever.
Yeah.
Among the other things I teach is performance reviews, right? With cases where you sit down, this rep's not making quota, what are you going to say? And I always ask, show of hands, how many of you before business school did have to sit down with a human being and give them feedback? And that percentage has decreased over the years to where now it's usually somewhere between 25, 30%. Maybe 1 out of 4, 1 out of 3. That's the big issue. It is not IQ. That is not their scarce resource, but it is about the human dynamics in business. But, you know, that's part of what education and experience are about.
And life experience is important when you run a business. That's why you ask in the MBA program that you have, how is it important for that entrepreneur thinking about starting something right now, that life experience where they've worked, where they've launched other businesses or whatever?
Well, I mean, you know, among other things, I've taught entrepreneurial management at Harvard, and we have data about that. And if you look at the average age of successful entrepreneurs, it's in their late 30s. And in fact, that average age, that is when they start a successful business, in their late 30s, 37, 38, 39. And that average age, despite misconceptions, has gone up over the last 10, 15 years. It hasn't gone down. Now, why is that? I'll get back to your word, relationships. What have they been spending that 15 to 20 years after they graduate from school doing? They've been building relationships. They've been learning an industry and learning important people in the industry. They've been taking a good look, because they're smart, curious people, at what works and what doesn't work in the industry where they're at. All of that is life experience, and it shows up in the data. I mean, people these days think about, when they use the word entrepreneur, I find most people who have zero experience of that experience think about Mark Zuckerberg, drops out of college, Bill Gates drops out of college, Steve Jobs. Those are by far the exceptions, not the rule. And what statisticians call survivor bias is alive and well. We ignore the millions of people who dropped out of college, started a business, and failed.
Yeah.
We point to the 2 or 3 that did it in their early 20s and succeeded. That's not where the data leads you.
I like that. It really gives people hope, because you can fail and still win. I mean, how many times Warren Buffett fail? I don't know the number. I won't even guess, but he's failed a number of times. One of the richest guys in the world.
Well, yeah, but the trick there, right now it's very fashionable to be talking about failure, especially in entrepreneurial circles. And I always like what one VC that I work with says. He says, Frank, failure is overrated. I think the key is learning from what doesn't work. And in order to do that, you can't just say, well, let me chalk that up to experience. You've got to be able to reflect on what happened. If you're a business and you try something and it doesn't work, you need a process for learning from that. So, failure is just bad news until and unless we learn something from it that we use positively next time.
It's well said. I like that. It gives people hope. And you mentioned luck in your business dealings, and we hear stories. I think Mark Cuban, I don't know who, but these celebrities say, hey, I got lucky. This happened. I got lucky. What is luck in business?
Well, I mean, I always think about it. Thomas Edison, allegedly said, when someone asked him, boy, how did you do all these things? He didn't use the word luck. He used the word opportunity, but I think he meant more or less the same thing. He said, most people miss opportunity because it dresses in overalls and looks like work. And what Edison was getting at, overalls, right? That was the term for what we now call blue jeans, workers' clothing. It's part of the mundane. It doesn't look particularly sexy, but it's in there, right? If you think about small businesses, many of the greatest of them are built on something we do every day that nobody else noticed. And it looks like work because it is work. Luck is being in the right place at the right time. But, I said, I think it was last year or the year before, to an executive, what I said to you. I got lucky in business. And I thought he made a smart comment. He said, Frank, if you're going to get hit by lightning, first you've got to be outside. You see what he was getting at? You gotta sort of be in the arena. You got to be there if you're going to get lucky. Then beyond that, it is a bit of a lottery. There is such a thing as dumb luck, good and bad, in business. That is true.
Yeah, and it's I like how you say that, because luck is good. I mean, you're not unhappy you got lucky. It's not a bad thing.
I highly recommend it.
Yeah. I love it. And I talk about people, when the opportunity door opens, walk through it. You can always walk back out.
Yeah.
And that's maybe where luck comes in, you walk in, or you got unlucky, you just walk out and
If
you
you're
pivot
going to get
somewhere
hit by
else.
lightning, you got to be outside. I think that was
It's
exactly his point. I agree.
perfect phrase. Well, business books are all over. I know one of your favorites is your own. I mean, again, I love the how to sell, and I'm going to say it again, how to sell in a world that never stops changing, because that'll be apropos 100 years from now, because we're always changing. But besides that wonderful book that you wrote, what's your favorite business book?
Well, if I had to cite just one, I'll go back again to the man I cited earlier, Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker was sort of the renowned management guru for decades. By the way, I think Drucker had a great comment about management gurus. He was once interviewed and asked, "How does it feel to be a management guru?" And Drucker said to the interviewer, "Do you know why business people call them gurus? Because it's easier to spell than charlatan." I think that's still true. But Drucker wrote lots of books, and he wrote them beautifully. I think he had it right. The important things in business are relatively easy to say, but hard to do. So you should be able to explain it without jargon. But my favorite book of his is a little book he wrote years ago called The Effective Executive. On the surface, it's one of these many time management books. But what that book is really about is setting priorities, understanding trade-offs, establishing a strategy as opposed to a goal. And it's also a pretty smart time management book. But I think if I had to cite one, especially to an SMB owner, that would be the book that I cite. And it's not like a 500-page tome. You can read it on a cross-country flight.
I like that. That's well said. Interesting. You're in business, you're Harvard Business School, so you teach business. Sales, obviously, you wrote about sales. What are other pillars that you may focus on in the MBA program that could help SMBs that are listening today?
Well, I mean, the MBA program, we're a so-called general management program. That is the strength of what we do. The whole first year of the program at Harvard Business School, you have no choice. Everybody must take the same courses, and those courses span all the functions. There's marketing, there's finance, operations, etc. Second year is a whole different story. It's all electives. You do what you want. The other teaching assignment I've had for years that's probably more relevant for your audience, Steve, is a program, an executive program called Owner President Manager, OPM. And it is all SMB programs from the United States and the rest of the world. It's about 50-50, 50% from the US, 50% from the rest of the world. And really, when you talk with those people and say, "Hey, do you think that program was worth the time and money?" And trust me, it's a lot of time and a lot of money. It's probably got the highest customer satisfaction ratings of any program anywhere. And the reason, I think, is self-selection bias. If you look at the executives who are coming there, they're all successful. They've all started and built businesses, but they're smart enough at a certain point in their careers to say, "I know what got me here, and I know what I want to do with the business over the next 5-10 years, and I'm just not sure if what got me here is what's going to get me there." And they use the program not only to learn about tools and other things, none of them have MBAs for the most part, but they also use it quite rightly to reflect on their particular businesses and what it takes. And they're doing that not only with, people like me, professors who have some experience, but they're doing it with about 100 other peers who have been there, done that, and are in the same position. So I think that's the key to education in business. It's not simply reading the book, knowing the jargon. It's about behavior and stuff you can use there's a tremendous amount of learning by doing. But again, it can't just be scattershot learning by doing. You know, you need a structure, focus, and priorities to get value from it.
I like that. OPM, I'm going to remember that. We're running out of time here, but this is one of my favorite questions. Because building relationships needs personal development. You need to take care of Steve Ramona first before I can build a relationship with you. So what are your key factors in professional development?
Well, I mean, I would cite two. The first one, and I'm going to say exactly what you just said, but with a sort of a different slant, different tone. You know, I'm going to be a little harsher about this than you were. I think the first thing to recognize about professional development, and I think the truth, Steve, is that we're living through an age of what I think is deceptive rhetoric about this. There are very, very few people who wake up in the morning and say, you know what my mission in life is? My mission in life is to make Steve Ramona or Frank Cespedes a better leader, a better person. No, the only person who's ultimately responsible for your development is you. So number one is you must take responsibility for that. Raise your hand for the right assignments, etc. And then the second thing is what I already mentioned, and it's backed up, by the way, by almost a half century of consistent research results. And it's about how adults learn. The majority of adult learning is learning by doing. They learn on the job. And what that means is, again, you got to raise your hand for the right mix of experiences. You know, how many people have you met in your career who say, I have 15 years of experience? And what they really have is 1 year of experience doing the same thing 15 times over 15 years. Again, nobody pays as much attention to you as you do. You learn by doing in business, but you need that mix of experiences. And you do have to be, in the right way, assertive about doing that. Those would be the two places I start from. Then it depends what you want to do, where you want to go. It gets very customized soon after that.
And I love that, because I talk to people and they talk, but they don't take the action or do something. Well, why not? Oh, this got in the way. Well, then don't talk about it and move on to something. The action, audience, that's $1 million tip right there. Just take action, because if it's wrong, you made a decision, you can always fix it. Right, Frank?
Well, you can often fix it.
Often, correct. Let's be politically correct here. Thank you. See, that's why he's a great teacher. He's teaching me right now. Well, I want to thank you, Frank, so much for being on. I've got a whole pad of notes here. I've learned so much. I really want to thank you for your time.
Steve, it's my pleasure. I thank you for inviting me. My very best wishes to you.
Thank you. And I want to put this out there. His book, called Sales Management That Works, How to Sell in a World That Never Stops Changing. This is what Forbes said. Perhaps the best sales book ever. When I read that, I was blown away, and I'm getting the book, and I'm going to reach out to Frank with questions when I read, because he's such a great guy, and, you know, maybe a text or an email, but get the book. And how can they get the book, Frank? Or if they need to reach you, how can they reach you?
Well, there is our friend Jeffrey Bezos. You can always get it on Amazon. It's published by Harvard Business Review Press. You know, go to the usual suspects would be my advice.
Perfect. And like I always say on my shows, I love podcasts because you can go backwards and forwards. There's $1 million tips in here. Seriously, an SMB can make $1 million in some of these tips Frank put out for free for you. Get the book as well, but watch this show or listen to the show a couple times, gather all the information that's apropos to you, and grow your business. Don't forget about my TV show, Together We Serve. It's 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern on Fridays. So today's Wednesday, so in a couple days. And don't forget our podcast swag. If you want to doing business with a Servant's Heart hoodie, t-shirt, long sleeve shirt, that'll be in the show notes. And then last but not least, I thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you on the next podcast, Doing Business with a Servant's Heart. See y'all.